Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. Today we're welcoming an Oakland-based author who has already published 2 award-winning, what they call legal thrillers, I think. Yeah. One is I Right the Wrongs, which we had the intelligence to do an interview about. And the second one, The Misdemeanor Man, somehow we missed on that book.
I forgive you.
And he's now on an autobiographical piece of business. His name is Dylan Schaffer. The title of the new book is Life, Death, and Bialys, with the helpful subtitle of A Father-Son Baking Story, published by Bloomsbury. Welcome back.
Thanks, Jim.
A baking story. I've never done a baking story before. But before we get to the baking part, I want to get to one of the central elements in the book, and I need you to define it for those who perhaps are not familiar with what it is, a bialy, and particularly what makes it different from a bagel.
I'm always stunned to learn that people don't know what bialy is, because bialy is such a fabulous piece of bread. It's like a bagel in the sense that it is from Eastern Europe. It was brought over to this country by immigrating Jews, and
from a place called Bialystok,
Bialystok in Poland.
Where else?
Exactly, and it is very similar to the bagel in the sense that it's a breakfast bread, but it's different in that it is not boiled before it's baked, so it's just baked, and it also does not have a hole in it. It has an indentation in which typically is put oil and sesame seeds or poppy seeds and onions.
Onion, yeah. It has to have onion. Now, also, and this is in the book. I mean, this definition which you just recited is in the book for those who want to, catch up at home. Now, you also have a couple of tips on how to eat it properly.
Correct.
It seems that it must be smeared with something.
Usually with cream cheese. My father, who's the subject of the book, liked to eat it with both cream cheese and butter. When he was a rather large man, and he liked his fat in large quantities. So, and if you can get it fresh, which is the best way to get it, although it's difficult to find that in the Bay Area, you can definitely find it in New York. The best way to eat it is straight out of the oven. You don't want to toast it. If you get it not fresh, then it can be toasted, but that's not the ideal situation.
Warm it up. Now, the reason we have to get to the bialy is because your father invited you to attend the French Culinary Institute's artisanal bread baking school in New York City. And this is a rather strange invitation.
Very strange, for all sorts of reasons.
So one of them is that he's dying.
Correct. He called me 7 months before the class was set to begin to say he wanted to take this class with me, and for 3 reasons, it was a very strange request. First was he was a person who had absolutely no interest in baking and had never expressed an interest in baking in his whole life. That was about 70 years.
Okay.
Also, although we had a relationship, he had left my family and left my mother when I was a small child, and we hadn't had really very much contact in the intervening 30 years. Certainly, we had never spent more than, say, a day together alone. And the idea was we were going to go to New York and live in a hotel room and spend 7 days together in this intensive baking class. And
you thumbnail, if you will, describe this man early on in the book. My father is a short, fat, terminally ill bull in a world that is all china shop. It is best to avoid irritating the bull.
Did I say that?
Yes, you did. It's right here. And you're going to spend several days with him in close quarters in something that hotel.com would describe as a suite.
Yes, it was a flop house in the Bowery. My father, although he was terminally ill and had plenty of money, decided he wanted to save a few dollars, so we ended up in a flop house in the Bowery instead of at a nice hotel.
And so there you are. And the other element there that I remember from reading the book is that it had an air conditioner that had 2 ways to go. Either it was very low or it was very high. And when it was very high, it was too cold and it sounded like an airplane taking off.
I think I described it in the book as it would have been the right-sized air conditioner for a Walmart store. So when it was on, it was enormously cold, and when it was off, it was terribly hot.
So this is where your father, from whom I guess we could say you're somewhat estranged.
Well, at the time of the action in the book, we went into the book estranged. I think at the end of the book, and this is sort of the thematic center of the book, is that it's a book about hope and about coming together at the end of life. But certainly we went into the action estranged from each other.
Strange parents you have. Your mother is described at one point as a lousy mother, but you add, at least she tried. Flip, who's the name of your father, just walked away. I don't know. Life, Death, and Bialys is about many things. One of them is baking and its benefits. I want to look at those things when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at JimFosterCoc or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
An old friend from Oakland, Dylan Schaffer, is the guest. His new book, Life, Death, and Bialys, a father-son baking story. This is not a legal thriller. This is a wonderful autobiographical kind of book about which Eilert Waldman, author of Love and Other Impossible Pursuits, says, Dylan Schaffer writes with remarkable humor about that most painful of subjects, family. Anyone who has ever been driven over the edge by a maddening parent, and who of us hasn't, will delight in this book. And we all have at one time or another. And one of the ways Flip drove you close to the edge is simply the tone of voice with which he ends his sentences, which I've found rather strange. You write that it's not what Flip says that makes me want to stuff a whole pickled tomato down his throat and come to his rescue only after a good minute or two of choking. It's the tone. It's as if at the tail end of every sentence there is an implied, "You complete idiot."
He was a bit of a know-it-all.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I want to get to is what was it like in and of itself going to this bread baking, this artisan school of French cooking?
It was hard, and it was surprisingly hard. When we went to the class, we didn't expect it to be a serious baking class. I think both of us expected it to be the sort of class that an amateur cook might go to, the sort of thing that you might find at a fancy kitchen supply store in the Bay Area. What we found was a very serious class intended to train people to become commercial artisan bakers. And neither of us was prepared to spend 8 hours a day lugging around 80-pound bags of flour and making hundreds and hundreds of loaves of bread. In
a very hot atmosphere, too.
It was the summer in New York, and it was humid, and it was 90 degrees in the kitchen.
My goodness gracious. And at one point you reflect and decide that what's really going on here is this very fancy restaurant, which is connected to the school, is getting its breads free from this, quote, slave labor in the school.
We paid good money to go to this class to learn to bake, and what we gathered after a couple of days.
Not only not paying you, you're paying them.
Yeah, I mean, we were baking their bread. They had this free labor to serve their restaurant.
These clever French.
Well, it's not actually French. Actually, they're changing their name soon to the International Cooking School. So.
Oh, okay.
But the bread baking was largely French artisan bread, so it was baguettes and that sort of thing.
The other thing that's going on, though, is there's stuff going on beyond learning how to bake, and I would say that going in, you were hoping for things to happen beyond the baking of bread.
Yeah, I think my father came. I mean, the request to bake was a strange one. So when I was thinking about what he really had in mind, my sense was he knew he was about to die, and he wanted to make some amends. So I hoped that when we spent this week together, he would talk about things he'd always refused to talk about, and I hoped that I would be able to ask him questions that I had never been able to get answers to before.
Yeah, that's an important point, because you say that flip and banter, this is how we avoid talking, you and your dad. I've tried to talk to my dad about my feelings, about our history, but we don't often get very far before we just swing back into chit-chat. I rarely press him because I'm not really sure I want to know the truth.
And also, he was a guy who would disappear at times, so I was always worried about driving him out of my life.
The first time he disappeared, what were you, 5 or 6 years old? You were in New Rochelle?
Right, I was 5.
And off he goes, and you never, up until we get to the time of this book, you never feel or felt that you knew why he did that to you.
Yeah, I mean, my parents split up, but he more than just left my mom, which was a matter of their relationship. He also left the New York area where we were living and moved to South Carolina. And it was always a source of pain for me that he left and left my family without a father. So I was hoping that in this week together I would be able to ask him what drove him so far away from his family.
Now, at the same time, you're having these expectations. I got the impression that as far as your dad is concerned, he's having a ball.
He was always having a ball.
Younger women are showing an interest in him, among other things, and he's catching on to the bread baking stuff.
He was a charmer, and he loved to be around groups of people, and he loved to tell stories, and he had a great time in the class.
I don't know how to describe his style with people other than to say it was straight ahead. It does have that bull in the china shop thing. Tell us about how he got to say hello to Jacques Pepin.
He was a guy who was very, very interested in cooking and in Jacques Pepin. But he met him during one of our jaunts around the school. He met Jacques Pepin, who was a chef at the school.
Yeah, Jacques was talking to a group. He opened the door, walked in, and started talking to Jacques. And you're outside saying,
shook his hand and walked away.
Life, Death, and Bialys, a father-son baking story. What the father got from the baking, more than a very good time when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast. One of the people who likes this book very, very much, I think, is an author by the name of Jonathan Rosen, who wrote, among other things, Joy Comes in the Morning. I don't know what's more impressive, he says, the fact that Dylan Schaffer can write about his impossible father with wit, novelistic vividness, and forgiving wisdom, or that he knows how to make a perfect baguette. Either way, he's written a funny, entertaining, and unexpectedly moving book. I'm a little bit concerned about that claim about the perfect baguette. I mean, we have no way to prove that.
It's false, too. It's very hard to make a perfect baguette outside a professional baking kitchen.
That's what I was thinking, yeah. At the end of the book, there is a recipe for Bialys.
And Bialys are easier to make in a home kitchen than a baguette.
But in both cases, aren't you using that kind of yeast upon which you cast opprobrium?
We frown, yes. Commercial yeast we do use in the home kitchen because it's easier. You can use home starter, but it takes a long time to make home starter.
Okay. We mentioned in the last segment that we both feel that your dad had a heck of a good time at the baking school. But I wonder, what else do you think he got out of it?
Well, he was looking for a way to tell the stories that he had never told before, and he was really looking for a way to ask forgiveness for having done his children wrong. And I think that the conversations we had while we were in New York about his life and about the reasons that he left my family and about other mysteries that had sort of come up in my family allowed him to exit from the world with a sense of peace.
What was it, his illness, the state of his health, that you think that made it possible for him to get beyond what you call chit-chat?
I think so. I think he kept himself alive just long enough to take this class, to answer the questions that had come up, and to apologize to me, and to thereby sort of seek forgiveness from me. He died very, very quickly after the class was over,
yes,
within weeks.
Yeah. And one of the last things he said about things was that going to this class with you was the best thing he'd ever done. And in fact, these were words that he used in describing the experience to the people, his fellow professors and so on at Clemson.
Correct, yeah. He said it was the highlight of his life. And the reason was not because he had learned to make a baguette or learned the difference between various kinds of flours. The reason it was the highlight of his life is because he finally explained what happened, and he asked his son to forgive him. And that, I think, gave him a sense of peace that he hadn't had before that he had lived with this guilt for many, many years. So it let him go.
You know, there's a point in the book where I wanted to box you around the ears. Your father goes into, explaining what happened, asking forgiveness, and you write about yourself that after all of that, you have still permanent mixed feelings about your father.
Well, as a child, when you're 5 years old and your father leaves you, and he left me in a family that was my mom was a very difficult person and had her own problems.
Oh, did she?
You develop
she was certifiable. Let's say
she was certifiable.
That.
I was going to go there.
And it's this certifiable woman with whom he left you and your sibling.
Right, and so I was angry. And although we had developed a relationship over the years, and although he did do some important things when we were in New York in terms of explaining things and in terms of asking for forgiveness, it is not possible, I don't think, to let go of that sort of lifelong resentment in a week.
There's a scene toward the end of the book when you and I guess your wife and some of your siblings are with your dad down in Clemson, a scene around ice cream. I see now stuffing spoons full of ice cream into my mouth that he and I have gone opposite ways around a loop of sorts. He was absent when I entered the world. He left just before my 6th birthday when he was 39. He missed all my parties as a child, and here we are at the end of his life celebrating my 39th birthday together. I think this is the best Bialys I've ever had, he says the next morning. Flip's assessment, you write, is preposterous, but it also makes perfect sense. His son baked this Bialys, which is probably the last he will ever eat. So I suppose it tastes pretty damn good. And the book is more than pretty damn good. It's the story of a father and a son, a story of hope, a story of reconciliation. The title is Life, Death, and Bialys, a father-son baking story. The author is Dylan Schaffer. This has been Conversations on the Coast.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.